Cheers, role players! Welcome to the RPG Foundry. My name is Matt. I will be your dapper dungeon master today. Today we're going to talk about Encounter Building 101. This video is going to be a general overview video. We're going to talk about the 5 important things to think about whenever you're about to make a encounter. Now we're going to go into these in much more detail in separate videos. This is just the overview, but stay tuned until the end for a great resource that's really going to help you planning all of your encounters. You ready? Let's get started. Alright guys, so the first thing to keep in mind when you're building your encounter, and the reason this is number 1 is because it's going to influence everything else in your encounter. All other steps here are going to be influenced by this one. And so the first one is, what is the difficulty of this encounter? How hard do you want this encounter to be for your characters, right? The problem is with this is every system is different, and how a system kind of tells you to plan out the difficulty of encounters and how that actually plays out with your group is really rarely the way it is. A lot of systems have a challenge rating or a difficulty rating system that just doesn't always hit the nail on the head because it's so hard to figure out how difficult an encounter is going to be because all the groups can be so different. You know, an encounter that might be really easy for a group of melee combatants may be incredibly difficult for a group of spellcasters, or vice versa. Or if you have a really balanced group, then maybe you can't just throw everything that is really against melee characters at a balanced group like that, because it's going to skew one way or the other. And there's so many things to keep in mind here. So I'm going to give you a couple of things to keep in mind, and we're going to go into much further detail in the video for difficulty. But some things to keep in mind are, when you have all these creatures, or NPCs or whatever that your characters are fighting, think about and take into consideration, what is their armor class? How hard are they to hit versus how hard do your players' characters hit? Kind of know what that means. Know what they need to get on their dice for most of them, or particularly for the big hitters. What do they need to get on their dice in order to make a hit and do damage? How much damage can your characters do? If they get a hit and they're doing average damage or they're doing above average, keep that in mind. How much damage are they expected to do on a regular turn? How much damage can they do when it's a max hit, and how much damage can they do if it's a critical hit? Will, if the barbarian runs in there and gets a critical on one of these monsters, is it going to end the encounter? Be prepared for that, because it happens. It actually literally just happened in the session that I had with my players yesterday, so be aware of that, think about that, kind of compare those, and do that for the monsters too. How likely are the monsters to hit your PCs? What is your PC's armor class? How likely are they to hit? If you're only needing, if you need 19s or 20s to hit, that's going to be probably a pretty easy encounter for your players. Action economy is also one of the biggest things to keep in mind when it comes to the difficulty of an encounter, because if you've got 4 players against 1 creature, they're all getting, their side of the table is getting 4 actions to your monster's 1, unless your system has things like legendary actions, and that helps with that a lot. But account for those for whatever system you're using. If your system has that, just keep those in mind, that you're going to get those to help even out. If your system doesn't have that, remember that. Probably throw in some extra things to keep the actions going. Now, I've done some really great epic encounters that was a 4-on-1 or a 5-on-1 in a system like Pathfinder, where there isn't legendary actions. And it works out okay. That one I did actually add in some lair actions, which really didn't end up influencing the battle at all. But if you can do stuff like that, feel free to do that. And then, but always remember that what you're trying to do is create this encounter to that difficulty level. So for all the rest of these things that we're going to talk about, remember and think about how that relates to the difficulty you're trying to get, because when you add in too much stuff, the chances are you're probably making it more difficult. And difficult encounters are great as long as you intended that to be. But the last thing you want is for an encounter that was supposed to be kind of an easy, walk in the cake thing for your players, ends up taking forever. Sometimes that works out great. Most of the time, though, it's a little bit disappointing, and even you can feel like, oh, this wasn't supposed to be this hard, you guys. Let's just go. So just keep that in mind. And for everything we're going to talk about for the rest of this video, what is the difficulty going to be for your players? Step number 2, now we go more player-centric, and we're looking at what is the goal of this encounter. What are the characters supposed to accomplish with this encounter? If it's a random encounter, they're probably just going to defeat the enemies, scare off the bandits, bust down that door, whatever it is. Fairly easy when it comes to random encounters. Planned encounters might be a little bit more tricky, more complicated. It could be as simple as the goal is to rescue the princess. Okay, easy enough. Go in, rescue the princess, take out whatever's guarding her, rescue her, save the day, you're good. It could be incredibly complicated, and it could involve multiple things, and they have to do several things, and it's a multi-step process all throughout this encounter, and that may end up making multiple encounters, and that's okay. But you as Dungeon Master need to keep that goal in mind, because if you don't have that goal in mind, your players are going to take it a completely different direction, because they're really good at that. Now, that can make for some really, really fun adventures, so I'm not saying don't allow that to happen, but I'm just saying if it's going to happen, you need to make sure that it's still going to fit into the overall reason and the overall theme of your story. Okay? That's step number 2, the goal. What are the characters trying to accomplish? Step number 3 is the place. Where is this encounter going to take place? Now, for the most part, you as the Dungeon Master should know where this is going to happen. But we've all played games where our players go completely off the rails and we have no idea where they're going to go. And that's okay, because when you plan the specific locale for where this encounter is going to take place, in the forest, in a dungeon, in a cave, in a building, whatever it is, wherever your players go, you can just kind of whoop, and set your place, your specific locale into that area. Right? If they're going into a different cave than you expected, that's okay. They didn't know what the layout of the cave was. Just whoop, pop your little cave area out of wherever it was, put it wherever they went, and you still have a great encounter. But plan out the place. And when you're planning out the place, here's some really important things to keep in mind. Is it wide open or is there cover? Is it a wide open field or a cave, or are there trees, are there rocks, are there stalagmites and stalactites and rivers and things? Keep that in mind. Is it all on one level? Is it flat? Or are there multiple levels? Can your players and your enemies go up and down? Are they going to be able to fly? Are they going to be able to swim? Right? Keep that in mind, because that can make encounters way more interesting. But if you're going to do levels, one thing to really keep in mind, how are your players and your enemies going to access those levels? Are there ladders, stairs, handholds? Can they fly? Ropes? Whatever it is, make sure that you have ways for your players and your NPCs to get to those various levels. When you're planning out the place, it's also really important to keep in mind your character's abilities. For instance, if you've got a rogue in classic D&D, 5e, or Pathfinder, are there going to be places for your rogue to hide? Are there outcroppings for them to hide so they can get their sneak attack, right? Is your wizard going to be able to effectively use battlefield control spells? Is your terrain set up so that if your wizard casts that battlefield control spell, are they going to completely shut down your enemies, almost negating your entire encounter? Just keep that in mind, and that's going to wildly depend on the makeup of your party. So just think about that as you're preparing this terrain. On the flip side of that coin, will your NPCs, your monsters, your enemies, are they going to be able to use their abilities effectively? For instance, if you've got an air elemental in here, is your air elemental going to be able to fly, or is he trapped in a 40-foot cavern? That's going to drastically impact the nature of this encounter. If you're taking a character's ability and you're almost completely negating it because of the terrain, you need to adjust, or know that it's going to adjust the difficulty. If you're going for a hard encounter with an air elemental, but you don't let it fly more than 30 or 40 feet up, it's not going to be nearly as hard as it normally would be. So just keep that in mind. Lastly, an important thing to keep in mind about the place, are there traps? And if there are, lay them out. Know your DCs for spotting them, know your DCs for disabling them, and know what they do. things to just have in mind as you're planning things. Traps are really tricky, and we're going to have an entire video just on traps because they are a really nuanced thing to have in your game. But they can also be a lot of fun when done correctly. So don't avoid them. Don't overdo them. And just think, does it make sense for there to be traps in this particular location? Number 4, and this is definitely one of the more complicated ones, so I can't wait for the full video on this one. The NPCs. What NPCs are your players' characters going to be interacting with? Are they dumb beasts? Are they really smart humanoids or really smart creatures like dragons or beholders? Keep in mind the intelligence level of the NPCs, of the enemies that they're going to be fighting, and play them that way. Particularly if your players are going into their lair or their favored terrain. That is going to drastically impact the nature of this encounter as well. Now, when you're dealing with and planning out your NPCs, you also want to keep in mind several things. How many are there? What kind are they? What's their relationship to each other? Are they a trusting group of creatures or NPCs or humanoids that have worked together for a long time? Or are they just newly banded together and they don't really have bonds of trust yet? Because I guarantee you one of your players is going to try to abuse that lack of trust if they figure it out. I'm talking to you, rogues. All right. Why are the NPCs here? Now, I know that from a DM perspective, they're here to make a cool encounter. In-game, why are these NPCs here? What brought them here? Is this their hideout? Were they brought here as guardians? Are they hired hands? Were they bought as guard creatures for this lair to guard them while the master is away, right? Think about that. It doesn't require a lot of thought here, but just have that in mind because it might impact how your NPCs react to your player characters. Also of note, do they know your player characters, right? Think about that. Do they have a prior relationship or have they heard of your player characters? When your characters walk down into that cave, are the bandits going to go, oh, it's the group that has been causing havoc for good. Oh, we're in trouble, right? Something like that. Or are they do they not know them at all? And the group walks in and goes, oh, you've walked into the wrong bandit lair, my friends. Prepare to die, right? Again, quick thought, yes or no, do they know them, do they not? Can make for an interesting encounter if they do, but they certainly don't have to. Another really interesting thing, and this is one that doesn't come up a lot, which is really too bad, is do they fight to the death or do they run? If they run, what's their run condition? Do they lose a certain amount of hit points and then book because they don't actually want to die? This is a mechanic that unfortunately most games don't have a great method for. That's super not realistic, and I know, don't comment at me and say I'm not playing RPGs for realism. I get it, but there should be some realism, and most creatures are not going to fight you to the death. It's not worth it. They're not being paid enough. They're mindless creatures that their top priority is to survive and reproduce, and they can't do any of those if they're dead, right? So they have a run instinct. What triggers it? Certain number of hit points down, certain number of allies down, they're outnumbered by a certain amount, right? Just think about those, and when that happens, make sure to do it. I love having creatures and NPCs book it and retreat out of combat. I think it's a really cool mechanic because, one, it feels better when your characters don't have to take every battle to the end. When it's just clear they're going to win, have your NPCs run. Even if they know they're going to die or they have a good chance of dying in the retreat, they're going to do it anyway. They're going to lose morale. Get them out of there. If they're mindless beasts don't generally fight to the death. If they get injured enough, they're going to book it because it's not worth it to them. Now, again, it's going to depend on your NPCs. Plan that out ahead of time. Just think about that. Another really important one, what information do your NPCs know that the characters might want to know? Right? This is just good to, again, think about ahead of time, because undoubtedly at some point one of your players is going to knock out an opponent. They're not going to want to kill them unless your group is an entirely murder hobo. But even murder hobo groups sometimes want to kidnap a guy and question him. Now, of course, this only matters for intelligent creatures, so don't worry about it if it's mindless beasts. But if they're intelligent, what do they know? Can they trade that information for their lives? Will they? Or are they loyal to their master and they'd never betray them? Again, just something to think about. and it'll make your encounters feel more fleshed out and fulfilling for your characters. Lastly, and sort of as a side note, what languages do these NPCs speak? Think about that, because if you're sending your characters to fight a whole bunch of goblins and you're expecting the goblins to be able to give up some information, or your players to overhear a bit of information while they're sneaking around, you better make sure a couple of your players speak Goblin. Lastly, and a great segue into actually the next one, but we're going to finish up NPCs. What gear do these NPCs have on them? Plan this out ahead of time. Now, a lot of games have really great rules, mechanics, and even set up whole books for what do these creatures have on them. Potions, armor, weapons, scrolls. The MacGuffin, does one of them have the MacGuffin on them? Better make sure that you plan that ahead of time, because if your characters go rifling through a bunch of corpses and the MacGuffin's supposed to be there but isn't, you're going to feel it when you go, and everyone leaves the cabin, you go, oh, crap. He didn't take the ruby because I forgot to tell him it was there. I've done that. Every new DM has done that. It happens, but this will help avoid that. So just plan out, how much gold do they have? What are their weapons? What are their armor? And do they have any magic stuff on them? Okay, just plan that. And if there are any important MacGuffins, make sure to place them there and make sure that it's obvious. And just a little tip here, put the MacGuffin on the first corpse they see. Just, if they're fighting a bunch of stuff, it doesn't matter. When someone says, I go loot that one corpse, just say, great, he's got the ruby, he's got the medallion, he's got the wand, whatever it is, because you don't want them to search, one or two, and they both have the same thing and go, we don't need this crap, we're not going to search the rest of the bodies, and then you're like, whoop, and then they move through a couple of rooms, come to the spot where they have to have the MacGuffin, and then you're like, better search through all the rest of the corpses. Don't do that to yourself, don't do that to your players. Just put it on the first corpse, and they're more likely to search the other corpses too. And you can just say, all the other corpses have the same thing, but none of them have the other MacGuffins, right? There's only one. My precious. Sorry, that happens occasionally. It's kind of like Tourette's, but, Lord of the Rings style. Great segue then into the last, number 5. This is the rewards. What are your characters going to get out of this encounter? Now, immediately your mind jumps to treasure, at least mine does, because that's the kind of player I am. But the other important thing here is experience. What experience are your players going to get out of this and their characters if you're playing an experience leveling game? Now, if you're playing milestone leveling game, you just need to know, is this one of the milestones or is it not? But if it's an experience level game, make sure you've planned out the experience here ahead of time and you know what experience is each thing worth. You'll know how to divvy it up, you'll know what the total is, and a lot of games, you're actually going to need to use the experience to kind of calculate the difficulty. A lot of games say, if you want a hard encounter for a party of 4 level 4 characters, then your experience total for the encounter should be, 5,000 experience, whatever. And that's going to kind of give you a general rule, and you want to adjust that, of course, as you need to. And we're going to do an entire video on just difficulty, because as I said in the beginning, it's super simple. Is it easy or is it hard? And yet it's super complex, and each game system is going to be a little bit differently, and everything that we've talked about in here, the reason, the place, the goal, the NPCs, not so much the treasure, except if the NPCs are using it, right? All those 5 things are going to impact the difficulty. Because let me tell you, if you are having your players fight a group of air elementals on the plane of air, way, way harder than having them fight in a 30-foot tall cave, right? Things like that are going to matter. So we'll do a whole video on that, but keep that in mind as you're doing stuff. As you're planning out your XP, make sure that you understand how your game kind of uses XP in determining challenges of encounters. Other things to write down here, and we kind of talked about this last, but it's good to talk about here as well. Do they have any quest items, MacGuffins? Do they have any coins? Do they have any gems? What equipment? Potions, magic items, these things. If they're natural creatures, is their hide worth anything? Are their feathers worth anything? Their saliva, their, acid glands, whatever it is. Because players are always, almost always, going to try to carve that turkey up and get all of its gizzards, whatever creature it was. So make sure you kind of know ahead of time what that is and what the DCs are for making that, you know, and understand what your specific game mechanics are for getting that stuff. Because one, it's kind of fun, and two, it's a lot better than you fumbling at the table going, DC 22 to get that gland out. What does that gland do? You get a vial of gland juice, but you're not sure what it does. Plan that ahead of time. It just helps it go smoother, and again, really makes your encounter feel more fleshed out and fulfilling. Last thing to kind of keep in mind here, if you're playing an experience-based game, when you're planning out your experience, know, is that experience, are the players going to get that experience whether they defeat the encounter with combat or another way? If your characters use diplomacy to negotiate with those bandits and get the MacGuffin, do they still get their experience? Or do they have to kill all the bandits to get their experience? Will they get half for doing diplomacy? 3/4? A quarter? Plan that out ahead of time, because when you don't plan this out, your players are absolutely going to find a different way to do it. Unless, of course, they're murder hobos, and then you can just count on them murdering everything, and it's fine. But seriously, know ahead of time. Stealth okay? Diplomacy okay? Intimidation okay? Tact? Going through a secret entrance? Melding stone through the cavern walls to get where the main boss is? Just know, how are you going to deal with that if you're doing an experience leveling game? Okay? Guys, those are the 5.5 things that you need to know when you're building your encounters. I hope this was helpful for you, and in the spirit of making encounters easier to build and more fleshed out, I have developed for you a worksheet that you can download for free, link down in the description below, for free, no email needed or anything. That's just a worksheet that you can save to your computer, save to your Google Drive, save to wherever, print it out or open it up on your computer, and you can fully type in here, and it goes through all 5 of these things. There's tables for you to use, there's a grid for you to kind of lightly sketch out your place before you put it on, you know, your virtual tabletop or your battle map, all kinds of stuff just to kind of get your creative juices flowing and to help you think through all 5 of these things with some of the stuff that we've talked about. Check that out in the description. Again, totally free, just for you guys to use. Give me some feedback. Let me know how you like it. Let me know if you hate it. Let me know if you need some things. Love, love, love to hear your thoughts on the worksheet, on this video, and I'm super excited to do the other videos where we go really in depth into the reason, the goal, the place, the NPCs, and the treasure, and eventually the difficulty. Guys, thanks so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, please leave a like, leave a comment, hit the subscribe, hit that bell. You all do YouTube a lot. I'm sure you know how to do it. And if you're looking for more videos to help you run and play better role-playing games, I would love to have you join our community. Definitely by hitting that subscribe button below. You'll be notified whenever we do, you know, our new videos. And we're going to put out videos pretty often. I don't have a schedule yet, but really very often to help you guys. I love doing this. I love talking about role-playing games. So come and join me. You can find us basically on every social media platform at the RPG Foundry. So that's that. I am your Dapper Dungeon Master. Let's try that again. I am your Dapper Dungeon Master, Matt. Thanks so much for hanging out with me, and I look forward to seeing you in the next videos. Guys, here's to fun. Here's to adventure. Here's to role-playing games. See you next time.